Seconded. Councillor Cardwell, could you come forward and take the chair?
So could I just ask the officers a question on that very item? We are supposed to be getting an independent chair. Could you tell me where we are with that process, whether there are terms of reference, things like that, and who will be choosing who the new chair is?
In the middle of drafting an application pack we sent out in the last 4 weeks. Application pack for independent members for orders. The pack for the independent chair for standards goes out next week, and then the week after that will be the other. I didn't want them all at once, so there's like a sequence. But I'll circulate the pack to leaders. Thank you.
Can I advise that apologies have been submitted from Councillor Ros Gladden? Are there any further apologies? Lenisevich? Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest for any members or officers to declare? Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. It's not actually a pecuniary interest, but just for transparency, on item number 5, the Domestic Abuse and Violence Against Women and Girls update from CitySafe, it does mention children's centres and a programme that's delivered, and I do work in a children's centre, so just to make that clear.
Can members refer to pages 1 to 15 of our agenda, which are the minutes of the last meeting held on the 7th of July 2021, and also the presentation on the performance framework being developed by the Council?
Question on those, Chair. It is just a timing question relating to the performance framework. We had a very good presentation on it, if you recall. And I just wanted to know when that's coming back to us with a set of key performance indicators for the council and the individual parts of the council.
My understanding is there's a report coming back to the next meeting of the Mayoral Select Committee.
Can I move that we approve the minutes for accuracy? Is that agreed? Thank you. The supplementary agenda was circulated last night in regard to the Mayor's update. Can I ask Mayor Joanne to speak and outline the update? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Apologies for getting the information to you late. We've had some issues trying to do the comms on it this week. There has been a blog on the 100 days, and information from this update will be put out in our communications and some comms on social media in the next coming weeks. Some of the major things we've implemented from our manifesto within the first 100 days, obviously one of the key ones was the triple lock to our decision making and ensuring that we have a framework in place to make sure our decision making is viewed through the lens of equality and diversity, social impact and environmental impact. We have that framework in place now and just putting finishing touches to the guidance. The important thing is not only have we influenced Liverpool City Council in our decision making, we've also asked the region to update their decision making process to look at social impact as well. So it's having an influence across the region. We've had a number of meetings with commissioners and I'm leading the engagements. We've had some positive meetings and positive feedback, as well as some challenges and some challenging meetings. But these first 3 months are critical. They'll report back to the Secretary of State at the end of September. And of course, everything won't be rosy, but what it will be is, identifying the good things, identifying the challenges and a way forward. So that's a key milestone that we're coming up to. We have agreed to meet with the commissioners to develop their improvement plan. And this is why we're slightly late on our performance framework. We've got an improvement delivery plan, which you will have had sight of. the commissioners want their own oversight in terms of a high-level strategic improvement plan, which they will use for reporting back to the Secretary of State. And I think it's quite good that we've managed to collaborate with that, and we've agreed a session with the Cabinet, with the corporate management team and them, rather than them just do it and then come back to us and us to bat it backwards and forwards. So we've agreed to do that, and we've got some dates in the diary for September. Implemented training from the LGA. I think lots of us will have attended a number of training sessions which have had positive feedback on, but I think the LGA have been very supportive in delivering training and working so quickly with us in some of the issues that were identified in the Callan investigation, and we certainly have gone a fair way into delivering on the training that was required of us. Lisa's been working on the agreed key performance indicators, which we had a presentation of last week, but as I say, we just need to sign off what the commissioners want to do in terms of the strategic objectives around improvement before we bring that back next time. In terms of the Cabinet, we've matched Cabinet with skills, and we've embedded learning with ongoing training. I have regular one-to-ones with Cabinet members. We have development sessions, and also each Cabinet member, including myself, has got a mentor, which the LGA set up for us. I am the diversity portfolio holder for employment, education and skills, and the combined authority. I've set out my objectives and priorities with them, as well as those objectives around equality, diversity, inclusion, which I've also been given the portfolio for. In terms of our business support, it's quite lacking in terms of effective strategy about what we do to support businesses. So we reviewed what's in place, and we're looking at ways of working with our partners like the LEP and the Growth Platform to improve how we support business growth in the city, which will obviously take account for what happens in the region. I'm going to talk about the Violence Against Women strategy under the next item. I've met with various stakeholders, trade unions, businesses, police, fire, police and crime commissioner, university, taxi drivers, arts and community organisations, as well as myself and the Deputy Mayor, working with internal trade union council. I've requested across the combined authority, through Tony, I've asked that the chief executives look at waste management services across the region and see if we can identify not only what we can do better. We have some requirements by law that are coming up in 2024 around food waste, but also how we can work more efficiently and maybe make savings as well as create jobs. I think each local authority around their waste management services does things slightly differently, and some of us will have strengths where others have weaknesses. And I think by opening that dialogue with a view to working more effectively, hopefully not only can we go get better at meeting our targets in terms of carbon emission, but make some savings and create jobs as well. We've reacted to incidents of hate crime, not just professionally as an organisation in our statutory obligations, but also made cultural responses that have had positive feedback across the city, and developed a leadership governance structure for equality, diversity and inclusion, where the corporate management team and the Cabinet meet once a month to discuss this item. We had our first session last week, which was really productive, and it's not that the council does things badly around equality and diversity inclusion, we just don't communicate enough effectively around it, and perhaps not joined up in our thinking. So that meeting's been quite useful. We've had some long-standing issues that we're trying to deal with. St John's Market, as a lot of you know, have been going on quite a long time, but we have agreed with them to go into mediation, as well as we've commissioned a review of markets across the city. It's still not out of the woods yet in terms of coming to a solution, but hopefully we've got some progress on that long-standing issue. Lots of comms have been involved in raising the profile of the city, and for my expertise, provided input into the Good Business Festival that had a lot more recognition of local good businesses, because actually as a city, that's what we want to push out as a message and promote key messages around good business. Thanks, Tom. I'll take any questions.
Stick your hands up if you've got a question. Okay, I'll take Councillor Gibbons, Councillor Shortall and Councillor Radford. Is that everyone do it in threes, Joanne, yeah? Sorry, I can see both of you. Can I come to you next?
Okay. Yeah, I submitted 4 questions, all related to the ACC Convention Centre event, and was told by Chris on the way in that these are going to be referred to other committees. I didn't get a letter replying to that, even though I sent it in a week in advance, which I find disappointing. And I just want it flagged up that the questions relate to the power to remove or nominate directors to the board of the ACC, the power to nominate directors and exert control over the ACC, whether the mayor's powers are in any way limited by the introduction of commissioners, and what would be the financial implications of cancelling the event, and is there an economic impact assessment on that? And I'd like to hear when we're going to have a statement on this to clarify, because there's considerable public concern and moral concern over the reputational damage to the council and this city, and at which committees we will get the final answer to these questions. They're exercising quite a lot of our citizens.
I've asked Max Steinberg, the chair, to do a public statement. I've been promised a letter by tomorrow for their take on their reasons why they don't want to cancel the event, and we'll also, get a response from legal on the questions that you've asked. In terms of which committees, Chris is probably better able to answer, but that's where I'm up to with making sure the ACC, communicates their position on it.
Chair, just in terms of what we agreed around the governance of the companies, it was audit committee where it'd be housed, so it'll probably be the audit committee the questions go to. I'll have to go through them. There's not just Alan's, there's other members as well. Apologies to Councillor Gibbons, though. I should have contacted him to say. I had to tell him as he walked in. Apologies.
Just on supplementary, I think you mentioned that one was going to be in terms of just a sectorism and that committee. Is that true that part of the remit is going to that? Because I think we need a really urgent answer for the public on this.
Chair, I can get answers to the questions as then what committee the answers go with in the public forum. So we'll get answers to the questions quickly.
You, Councillor Shortall.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Councillor Shortall for the Alt 1 ward, for people who are watching the live stream. I've got 2 questions. And first, I want to congratulate the Mayor for the 100 days and the blog and vote 25. So, we haven't had the opportunity to congratulate. So, congratulations, you've done absolutely fantastic. I also want to welcome the triple lock, equality, inclusion, social value, and the climate emergency. I think that's really important. So, well done for that. My 2 questions are one on the ACC and one on UNESCO World Heritage Site. The first one on the ACC, again, you may have to email this to me, but I want to know how many directors voted on the decision to take the booking. What was the vote? And also, are there minutes available of that meeting? And finally, will the key words of the ethical charter be inserted into the articles of association and then reposted back to Companies House with the words inserted? So therefore the ACC group have to follow what is inside the articles of association, which is required by law. So that's that one. The next one is about the loss of UNESCO. And you mentioned this in the first 100 days of your blog, it's the opening line, really, because this is so important to the city. I can't emphasise that enough. Really, really important to the city. We had a debate about it on the tourism event select committee, which wasn't really satisfactory in my opinion, which is why I'm here to talk about it today. Just for clarity, the Liverpool City Region visit economy is worth over 4.9 billion, and we welcomed in 2019 when we could 67.3 million visitors to the city. So there's a lot there. And in terms of jobs, it supports 57,000 jobs. And the museums alone attract 3.3 million visitors every year. 3.3 million. In fact, the donation box in one of the in the museums take £211,000. Now that's just a box what people give generously over. Now that far outweighs any UNESCO music city that they can ever have. 50,000 mainly. One museum pulls in over 1 million visitors. So heritage is worth a lot. And I want to emphasise as well, by the way, for people who are tuning in, this was an inherited problem you got here. You didn't have a lot to do with it. It was put on your lap, so I want to emphasise that. And I also want to emphasise, which is something that doesn't happen often, is that UNESCO World Heritage Convention 1972 places a lot of responsibility on this government within the state of the Department for Culture and Media and Sport. And as you know, this government's not really helpful past the Watford Gap. Past the Watford Gap, places don't seem to exist, and certainly not Liverpool in the eyes of Westminster government. And that's something, it's so sad that we had to, in 2011, we had to do our own embassy. Can you imagine that? The city of Liverpool had to go and have an embassy in London to attract.
Councillor Shuttle, sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask, does this lead to a question?
Just the question I wanted to ask there really was, you know, we have a Liverpool City World Heritage task group, and there are 19 of them, and none of those 19 people turned up for our debate on it. Not one. In fact, only one councillor who's not a member of the select committee turned up, and that was a councillor for the Central Ward, and she turned up. She was the only one person that turned up to talk about culture, heritage. So what I would like to ask, given that this steering group still exists, by the way, this World Heritage Steering Group with the 19 influential ambassadors still exists. So are we going to dissolve that and have a new one, our own specific charter, heritage charter that you could do, and we could ask, because it needs a political chair, somebody who's enthusiastic about heritage, who knows a lot about heritage, who knows the difference between a listing and a local plan, and can we have that quality heritage mark type of thing done? Because I know you're a listening mayor, by the way, so you do listen. No one can take that away from you. Can you do something along those lines? Because we can't just leave that the way it is. So we need to do something. And the framework for the World Heritage Site for Liverpool actually goes from 2017 to 2024. So that's still got a lot of time left in it. So I know that I went on a bit there, but it's really important because don't forget, we knocked the cabin down and then we built a replica. So we do make mistakes. So thank you for your time for listening.
Thank you, William. Good idea on the ACC around the Articles of Association and stuff. Obviously, we'll get back to you about the answer to that question, but ensuring they don't just change it, take it on as an organisation, as a policy, but embedded in the memorandums and Articles of Association. So I'll go back to them about that. In terms of the UNESCO, and I know that it's been discussed at culture where it sits, but I've got a briefing from Sam Campbell that I haven't read yet, but I've got a meeting with Maria on Friday morning about what we can do to protect our heritage going forward. We have talked to Cabinet about developing a heritage strategy, and we have got some ideas about other heritage sites we can have, for example, maritime, what we might do, and what we might do to protect our waterfront going forward, especially. So I'll have to get back to you about the further detail on that. I have listened, I have taken on board, I will report back to Harry, but also going forward, officers and members are involved in what should we do next in terms of developing a heritage strategy and making sure that we engage members and the ambassadors of the task force in that process. I've got to say, you won't hear me say it very often, the government have been really remiss on this. But Caroline Dinage, Minister of MHCLG, she come up to Liverpool for the for the events that we've done around COVID, and it was actually really supportive. And actually, there was a lot of cross-party support. I talked to Lord Mike Story. He was helping us out in the Lords, and I've got to say, everyone was supportive in doing this. Too little, too late, unfortunately, but we did have cross-party support.
Councillor Kemp, did you have a question?
I've got three, so shall I take them one by one? It'd probably be easier. First of all, your first bullet point talks about implementing the triple lock. So I think we all know what a triple lock is. What I want to know is what implementing it means. Does it mean that on every agenda we're going to have a box, as we have done, for example, on equality, saying this has been ticked on the process? How will you be monitoring it, and how will we monitor you monitoring it?
I got a bit lost with the monitoring there. I think in the decision-making frameworks, you will see, like you have before, equality, diversity and inclusion, you will have the three boxes that are asking that. What we've got attached to it, what we will week on, with social value policy and guidance for that. So that's what we've developed as guidance, which we will publish on the intranet to help people understand the decision-making process. So in terms of monitoring, not only will you have guidance, but the decision-making framework, you'll have the guidance in which to ask the questions in relation to the reports that you receive.
Yes, I wasn't clear from that whether we will get an annual report on the whole of it or a regular report on each item where the triple lock is relevant, which I thought would be most of them.
It is relevant on most of them. I've yet to come across something where it hasn't been relevant, but I suppose we can pull that out on an annual basis of what kinds of, benefits we've, benefits to our social impact, our environmental impact, and EDI we've made over the year.
Okay, thanks. My second question relates to your third bullet point, when it said implemented training programme, etc. I must say, and Chris won't like me saying this, but I was quite unimpressed with the sessions that I took part in. It's sort of NVQ1 for councillors. Now, you mentioned before that, if I remember rightly, or somewhere in here, that every cabinet member is being mentored. And it does seem to me we need to go from this very, very, very basic training that we've had into much more specialised training, mentoring or support, whatever is appropriate, and be different things for different people. For example, linking appropriate councillors from all parties with the leadership academy, or specialist training on health and social care for a cabinet member and the chair of the select committee, for example. So when do we move from the overall stuff, the targeted stuff, which will really apply intensively to the right people across the council, and how will you monitor whether it's actually working, rather than saying, yes, 99 people went to this? How do you know it's made different?
Okay, so whilst you've been a councillor a very long time, Richard, appreciate that some people are newer to being the councillor role and have appreciated the training that has been delivered. We did have a requirement under the intervention that we received training, and we're getting in, we're ticking the box on that. What I can do for members and working with democratic services is look at evaluating that training, and then moving forward identifying further training needs, which we can evaluate in terms of impact. Chairs of select committee is something that's come up, and maybe that's what we need to do next after we've got the basic training, as you call it, out of the way. But I'll certainly take that on board to look at future training needs working with democratic services.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, just to add one thing to what the Mayor has said. At the next Mayor Leaders meeting this Friday, at the one after that, at the end of the month, the LGA will be presenting the paper on the next stage of all the members. We'll also go to the cross-party member development working group.
My third one relates to St John's Market, and I must say I'm very I'm absolutely delighted she's gone to meet people and created a mediation process there, because I was trying to get her predecessor to do that for the last 3 years. So all I wanted to know in the short term, and obviously that will take some time, it's actually quite complicated because of all the promises that have been made at different times, etc. Are they now paying full rent and service charges? Is there some process in hand to keep things under control while it gets sorted out?
I think mediation was our first step. We couldn't go forward. Mediation is to resolve that issue. The market traders recognise that they have to pay something. They're querying other things, but that's what the mediation process is in place to sort out. They do accept that, you know, this is a new leadership and that it's, you know, it's a fresh start in one sense, but we're in a horrible lease with St John's Market, a 100-year lease that we're 33 years into. There's no easy solution to this. But what I've tried to be is open and transparent with St John's Market about our position, their position, and I've promised to continue to be engaged with them to help resolve the problem. But I can't foresee that, you know, it won't be a bumpy ride, but the dialogue is open and we're resolving the issue. But they are more than aware and have committed to, they know they have to pay something for what's gone on in the past. But now we're coming out of COVID, I suppose we're in a better position to really, as part of the mediation, pin that down.
Councillor Toolan.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. You've been busy, Joanne, I can see, for 100 days. You've got a lot done. Congratulations. I just got a couple of things on your list I wanted a bit more clarification on. Reviewed the business support strategy. Is that going to be, my first question is that going to be a new business support strategy? That's one of the questions. Just referring to the St John's Market, I know that you're looking at a new market strategy for the whole of Liverpool. Is there any update on that one? And then something that maybe I've missed because I've just scanned this, is that have we applied to government for support with the schools and the gaps that the students will have suffered? I think I heard it yesterday that they're something like 2 or 3 years behind children who are in private schools. So is the government going to support us with some additional funding? Thank you.
The honest answer is the update on St John's Market will go to culture, and the question on schools will have to go to education. If you want to email in, we'll get you an answer quicker, but they're best taken at those select committees. In terms of business strategy, I think we've inherited a team in terms of business support, and there is no strategy to that. What I've found within the council is that some of the services we have in place are reaction to funding, and we don't have an overarching strategy for what we're doing. So obviously, in terms of the money that we have, we don't have money to provide business support. What I hope to do is negotiate with, you know, the local enterprise partnership and the growth platform, as well as the Liverpool City region, of giving a coherent strategy across the region of which Liverpool have got their part. Some of the things and the thinking behind it is part of reviewing it. It's about clustering organisations together to be able to access bigger support and we have the lowest business growth areas in the country, and you know, part of the responsibility of that is the growth platform. But one of the benefits of clustering together in a sector like they have in the Baltic with creative and tech is that they can access resources better. And so if we've got limited ability to give business support, I've asked Mark Spousfield to go away and look at giving support to develop clusters of organisations so they can access resources from elsewhere.
Can I just briefly come back on that? I know that the council has still got the Growth Hub support grant that's across the city region. I don't know if you've looked at that. I work for the Liverpool City region on the business support and before you came, we weren't supporting businesses. We do have that. Service, and I think what I would say is if we looked at that immediately and maybe either increased support on that or looked at how we work smarter, because from the figures that I saw, we compared to all the other city region councils or hubs, we were pretty poor on performance and support for businesses.
As you know, Maria, this is my background. I've got a degree in business studies and was doing a master's. And as a business owner in the past, have felt no benefit from business support that was available in the city. So there's no evidence that the business support that we give actually makes a difference. I've been asking for that for the 12 hours of business support.
Can I just come back on that, and maybe we can take it offline? But when I did the business support growth and I was a manager, it wasn't just helping small businesses, and this is something that's really close to my heart. It was going to businesses and getting them to employ apprentices and placements and training, which my day job I do. So that even if there isn't the business support that maybe we might be thinking of, it was actually touching with...
Councillor Toolan, if you could just pause you for a second, if you take your microphone off, please. Just as a reminder, under the code of conduct, you've now strayed directly into your area of employment. That becomes an interest, and that is a prejudicial pecuniary interest affecting your employment. So this is not the correct forum or the correct vehicle to raise such issues. Obviously, for any discussions related to your employment, you should declare an interest and absent yourself from any debate.
What do you want me? Do you want me to say that I declare an interest?
I would declare your interest. I would cease commenting on matters relating to your employment. If you do seek to continue to do so again, they can't be taken into account by the committee.
Okay, thank you. So just going back to what I was saying, there is benefit to the business growth, which is run by Liverpool City Region.
Okay, one of the things I felt in terms of business support that businesses needed in the city and wondered would be to better affect some of the issues we have about dealing with business issues, not being invoiced on time, the phone not being picked up about issues that they have. So looking at those things as well as business support is part of that business review.
Thank you.
Councillor Kushner, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Joanne. A couple of questions. One is that one of the manifesto pledges was building council houses, and I just wondered what progress you've managed to make on that. First question. The second one is related to the boundary review and more with the timescale, because as I understand, a draft report has gone to the commissioners, but there's not been any comment back. And at the moment, we've got a council meeting scheduled for the 1st of December, which leaves us very well probably a week to do any consultation. So just what plans there are about pushing that back, and just in terms of getting response from the commissioners.
So the council meeting's not the 1st of December, I think you mean the 1st of September. You said 1st of December. Yeah, September. So I thought you said December. 23rd, I think we've moved the meeting to when we had the political cabinet the other night. Ruth will write out soon. We spoke to Ruth. We've got a leaders meeting on Friday, which we're hoping to change the date. I think is it the 22nd or the 22nd to move the meeting. In terms of what happened with the commissioners when we discussed the boundary review with them, weren't too happy with the figure, but didn't give us an alternative figure. And we've said we can't go through a process of having our working party in place, agreeing a figure, going to commissioners, getting that bounce back. So we've agreed that the commissioners are going to meet with Democratic Services, that we're going to arrive at a figure that we can go back to the working party with, and that's where we're up to with the Boundary Commission. Obviously, on the 22nd of September is when it comes to council, but we were discussing as a meeting with Chris and Ruth on Monday. We're hoping to have an away day with the Labour group to get into more detail around the Boundary Commission. In terms of the housing strategy, that would go to the Housing Select Committee, and that would be for Sarah to report on at the Housing Select.
Chair, could I just come back on that? Just one question. I was asking specifically at the council housing because it's obviously an investment decision, and just rather than the strategy. But that's the first. The other thing is that I'm a bit concerned that this will be taken out of the political arena in terms of the boundary review and left to officers together with the commissioners to inform us of a decision which affects us as all elected members, rather than elected members giving instruction to democratic services, which, as I understand, the cross-party group did before. So I just wonder why elected members have been taken out of that process.
So as far as I'm aware, you meet regularly as cross-party working group on the Boundary Commission. So we haven't been taken out of the process. It's just the commissioners have a say, unfortunately, and they have the final say in terms of I've pushed back with commissioners about their role and their light touch, and I've identified by having conversations with them where they stand on it. Now, what we've got from MHCLG, when we've gone to them about light touch and decision making, it's clear to us that the commissioners have got authority to say, to push back on the final number. So we're trying to work together with them, not take anyone out the process, but include them in the process. So hopefully we can agree.
Okay. Councillor Radford.
I'm going to ask 4 questions, which I've nicknamed the 4 R's: refugees, recycling, roads and rats. And before I do, I think it would be helpful, if you don't mind, Chairman, just to reassure Councillor Kushner or any other members. We have had a considerable dialogue on the Boundary Review Working Party. We've had a lot of support from the officers. The officers have given us guidance, but the councillors, by consensus, and I think that would be the emphasis, by consensus, have asked for an action plan of dialogue, and we are trying to push back on the numbers the Commission are looking for. We have quite clinically scrutinised the criteria the commissioners are. I think, as Councillor Small, if I paraphrase him wrongly, no doubt will tell me off at another time and place, Nick's comments was really that we've got to be realistic what the commissioners and governors are expecting, and trying to push back as what is viable for us to meet them part way. So I can just share those comments, and if you want to have a chat outside, I would. But I wouldn't want any criticism of the officers in any way trying to influence us. They've given us good advice. Sometimes we've agreed with it, sometimes we haven't. But they have been acting on the steer of the councillors' presence. And I think it would only be fair of me to say that on behalf of the people at the Boundary Working Party. If I may, Madam, for the Mayor, for the questions I was going to ask, is on the 16th of June, the Ministry of Defence did an appeal to council leaders throughout the UK. I had the good fortune of being on that call. I don't know, I hadn't been on previous calls, but I got on that call for some reason. Immediately following that, I contacted Councillor Mitchell, who's got a charity, and just to share with you, he's identified 30 households in Liverpool that we've made known to the Ministry of Defence that could be available. I also tabled a question to the Housing Director to ask if what provision Liverpool will support. I think it would be candid to say our own military intelligence was far more forthcoming about the time frame they thought the Afghan authorities would, before they would collapse, were more realistic than the American authorities on press. And I was wondering if you would in any way like to give us a guide, or maybe in the next couple of days give us a guide on what the City Council's response would be. I have shared with officers not only the response as in housing, but also I think community integration and
I didn't know if you want to say something now or later. Do you want to go to the other questions, or do you want to deal with that?
Let's take that now, if that's okay. So on the 16th of June, around that time when we were talking about it, we wanted to push back to government. We want to take people and help and support people, but we need the funding to do it. And that's what was our message then. We also feel that we always take refugees, and that other cities and other partners don't quite do the part. So whilst there's a basic principle from us that we are happy to support and accept refugees, we were pushing back about other local authorities and seeking funding from government. In terms of our response, I think we're working on it now to the current situation, and I think our principles and our values and our past experience will all support that we would do what we can to support the Afghan refugees that are going to be coming over. But again, pressing on government to give us the right support and resources to do that.
Thank you very much. Can I express our personal support on that theme without going into the debate? I think we all circumstances and the sense of urgency. So thank you, Mayor. On recycling, I was very interested in picking up on your report to push for improved waste recycling, waste management. And I just would share that I did take the opportunity of taking the cabinet member Abdul around the ward, and over the last COVID period, we acknowledged the cleansing services were reporting that they had citywide a 10-fold increase in dumping fly tipping. I have to say, don't think our own district was quite so adversely affected, but we have noticed an incredible amount of what I described lightheartedly as a festival of fridges. Fridges are appearing in any back entry here, there and everywhere, as well as other white goods. And I did suggest to Abdul maybe it would be an opportunity to explore maybe some sort of partnership where we improve recycling, target white goods, and something you might want to take away on at the regional level. But I think there certainly must be something that could be done to improve the recycling and clearance of white goods, particularly with, you know, metal values rising, the environmental benefits. Do you want me to go to the other two, or just would you like
let
to
me
do
answer one at a time, if that's all right?
Yeah,
so I used to be on the board of Furniture Resource Centre when we set up Bulky Bob's a long time ago. I get very frustrated that people don't use the service because I think it's a very useful service. But I have also talked to Bulky Bob's in the past, not recently as the mayor, but perhaps having collection points in communities to be much more useful in terms of people being able to, put their items rather than dumping them. We have a number of grot spots across the city. So look, let me take that up as part of what we're doing around waste collection. Do recycle and repurpose white goods. They're based in Speak. Bulky Bob's can make most use of them. And so there's systems in place. We just need to ensure that communities take up the service, but also I think some newer communities aren't aware of the service. So I think there's a lot more that we can do, and let me come back to you with that.
And I would say one of the things we've been trying to experiment is we're trying to visit households not on the voting register, who quite often are non-British citizens who, for one reason or another, culturally may or may not desire to register. And we're trying to provide skip information, recycle information in different languages that dovetail to that household. Maybe there's some way we could improve data on that to improve all the agencies. If I now come to the second to last question, I've just spent the last week in the Townsend Lane area of which is Anfield geographically, Schubert Ward politically, and we're absolutely overwhelmed with the provision of RADs. There are cleansing problems. There's a high level turnover, and we have funded. We've had a lot of support. I'm not being critical anyway. We've had a lot of support from our press control team, and we've had a lot of rat baiting. We funded extra support through our neighbour grants. Is there any initiatives we as a council aren't taking that we could look at, or maybe learn from other authorities, because the rat problem in that particular locality has got out of all proportion, and the normal measures which we are applying additionally, rat baiting, skips, cleanups, are not making the progress there are, and didn't know if there's any learning curves, or are we aware are rats becoming more immune to the poison, is a question that residents are raising, and I can't answer. Is there anything we can learn from other councils?
Thank you, Councillor Radford. I can't answer either, really, to be honest. I can absolutely take it back to Abdul, Councillor Abdul Kadir, who's responsible for neighbourhoods, and ask him to look into it. It is a massive problem for certain areas within the city, and certain wards suffer more than others. And I know that we have a good rat baiting programme, but I know, for example, during COVID, Sefton Park, for example, it was quite horrific how the rat population grew. So I'll ask to look for good practice in other areas. Thank you.
And if I can ask on the last question and then make a very brief point, can I think I'll put it on record in email, but we've had excellent support from our city engineers on the question of roads. We all know the West Derby Road congestion scheme, because that's what it achieved, has been removed. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do in light of the collapse of the road on Green Lane, Old Swan Junction. If that hadn't been done expeditiously, then I think there would have been a horrendous impact on air pollution and congestion and traffic mileage. So I'd like to put our thanks to your team, and particularly in Wiggins, who liaised with us literally by the hour over that weekend. And I think it's only right we do give thanks to officers when they have really gone the extra mile. And then lastly, can I just thank my fellow councillors. I was elected to go on the Combined Regional Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which was a surprise to me, and I was elected as chairman. And if there's any questions any members or any party wish to pursue, we do have my colleagues, Councillor Pat Maloney, Emma Rothery, and if there are any issues that people wish to raise via us, I'm sure all of us would like to facilitate.
I just want to come back on Derby Road. You know, we're by no means by no means is this a reflection on what we want to do around active travel and cycle lanes, and we've given ourselves a deadline of 3 months to try and find an alternative to the cycle lane that was in Derby Lane. I think it was the right decision at that weekend. I think there was massive problems in the area, but I've got to be said, I'm very impressed with the work that's been done on highways since the new assistant director has been imposed, and all officers trying to pull together, and the commissioner has given some good input and feedback around what we do around highways.
Councillor Crowe.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mayor, for your presentation. Couple of questions. First of all, going back to the issue of the ACC and the Arms Fair. In your response to Councillor Gibbons, you said you were, asking for the board to explain their reasons for not cancelling it. But some of us would like to see a stronger response than that. We'd like to hear how you're going to do everything you possibly can to make sure it's going to be cancelled, and what actions are you taking to try to achieve that outcome. And the second question is, I'm beginning to be a bit concerned that the environmental impact element of your triple lock might be looking a bit under threat already. One example would be West Derby Road. Obviously that's a temporary situation, and it might get put back, but as we speak, the government funding for active travel could be under threat. We don't know. We haven't been told specifically that we have lost it. But if we do lose nearly £300,000 of government funding, which is still a possibility, then that would have been a huge blow to progress on active travel in the city. And secondly, in your update, you mentioned inviting new cruise ships to the city. Obviously, yeah, you mentioned a plaque about a new cruise liner or something. It was in the, maybe you didn't say it verbally, but it's in the written version that went out as a supplementary agenda. And obviously that's good for tourism, but it's a trade-off, isn't it? I cycled down the prom today to get to this meeting, and as I came into town, I could see a huge, thick plume of smoke coming off the cruise liner that's parked there now. I could see it getting blown into town. You could see thick smoke going into town. And as I walked up Castle Street into Town Hall, I could smell air pollution in the air, which was coming from that cruise liner. So I don't know, are you going to, and I'm concerned the council is taking very little action to do anything to address the impact of the cruise industry on the city. So I think that's a really important issue that you need to look at. But just more broadly, is your environmental performance going to improve, and are we going to see some positive actions to help us get towards zero carbon?
Okay, sorry, I think you're confusing the updates and cabinet members of 100 days and my updates. So my updates is on the first page. It'd be under culture around the cruise ship. Sorry about that. I didn't quite know what you meant. In terms of the arms fair, I've made a public statement that explains that I'm powerless to do anything about instructing the ACC to not have the arms fair take place. As everybody else has had a question tonight, so I can write back to you formally with the detail on that, but I have made a public statement. I am doing everything in my power. The reason I want the ACC to make a public statement is because the focus is on us, when actually I don't have the power to stop the event, and the previous mayor didn't have the power either, and that's the confusion by lots of people. So I can get back to you about the ACC, as I've promised others tonight. In terms of Derby Road, we had an issue. We had a massive sinkhole, and that's why we made that decision. And that's why we've also agreed a 3-month deadline in making sure we put the cycle lane back in. I'm not sure where we're up to with the government in terms of funding, but that will go under the Environmental Select Committee. But also, I can get someone to write back to you on that. In terms of the cruise ship, I think, with environmental objectives, it is a balance. And in terms of environmental impacts, that's the kinds of things that we will be doing under the triple lock. And, that's the kinds of decision making you can review when you're at council.
Councillor Nim.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry about that. 2 points. First of all, I'd just like to thank the Mayor for, when I come in, giving me an explanation of an email that I sent to Chris Walsh regarding houses getting built in Stonebridge Cross and the 4 wards. The meeting will take place. Joanne's going to get the information from the city solicitor and come back to me, and she's on holiday, so she'll come back in a fortnight. So hopefully we'll get some information for the people of Croxett, Norris Green, Club more than exactly on that. It's a request, yeah, this more than a question. It's about the city centre. When I say the city centre, I mean the city centre. And a number of complaints that I've had, even though I'm a councillor for Norris Green, I'm well known around the city centre, and especially with business people. And it's come now that they're actually calling Liverpool Dodge City. And it's not about the guns and the cowboys and all that. It's about where people are saying now the dodging dogmuck, the dodging bikes, the dodging scooters, the dodging professional beggars. And I walked through town, and I walked through town on many occasions coming up and down from Cunard buildings and to work. And I can see what's going on. And I know we rely heavily on tourists coming into our city, but also, as a Liverpool person, I'm proud of the city, but I'm not proud of what I've seen over the last, God knows, 6 months or so. I've raised this with Councillor Nick Small, especially about the bikes. And what Nick Small told me was about the bikes that we've got we can't stop them. I've actually stopped 2 policemen in the city centre when bikes have risen past me. I've said, what are you going to do about that? And they've said to me, they can't do nothing. So the question, the request of Joanne is there anything that we can do? Is there people that we can send out there? Who's the cabinet member in charge of it? We need to actually get something done about the problems that we are having in the city centre. And finally, I find it absolutely amazing that there's bikes. I'm not talking about the scooters now, they're bad enough. But there's these bikes that, it's Deliveroo and people like that, trying to make a living, by the way. But they're coming through the city, they're coming through the pavement, on the pavements,
and they're missing, just missing people. The other day, and I seen this, and this is the God's honest truth, the other day, I seen a bike stopping and shouting at an elderly person to put his head up, to lift his head up, and to see, so it could dodge it. So it's this, and the request I suppose I'm having, I want to ask the Mayor, is there anything that we can do about changing the legalities of bikes being able to go on the sidewalk and you know, just miss pedestrians, and if pedestrians, by the way. And also, is there anything we can do about this dog muck that's all over the city centre? And we know where it's coming from. They're coming from professional beggars who are putting dogs there to think that they're going to get more money off the public. So that's the request here. So 2 points. The housing, I've told Barry about it. But more importantly, the request about what can we do about the city going into disarray as it is, as I see it anyway.
So it was the Director of Finance, George, I need to speak to rather than City Solicitor over the capital funds, and I'll get back to you about that when she's back on holiday. In terms of the city centre, the Chief Executive spoke to me last week about a number of complaints around city centre being cleansed properly. We do have the big company that has the commercial district within the city centre who take money, a levy off businesses, and also clean the city centre and have the resources to do that. They employ 2 policemen, and you'll know better than me that City Watch is really under-resourced, and we don't really have the resources like we used to try and tackle some of the issues in the city centre. The bid have put another bid in. I'm not sure when the deadline is for that, but to take up the waterfront and make the bid district bigger, of which we can use the levy then to address some of the issues. So the Chief Executive is working on getting our street scene team and bid talking about what we can do better around street cleansing. Abdul Qadir is the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhoods who it comes under. But as I say, that's just one part of it around the bid. You know, if they end up successful and take up a bigger area, then we'll be able to work with them about using their resources to perhaps tackle some of these issues. But it's definitely been on the radar in terms of city centre cleanliness.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Joanne. Any more questions before we move on? Okay, thank you. Is the update from Mayor Joanne noted? Thank you. So we move on to item number 5, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, an update from CitySafe. Can I ask Mayor Joanne to introduce the report to us?
Thank you. So I've conducted a review of violence against women and girls. There's an endemic of violence against women and girls globally, but we've seen 5 homicides in our city during lockdown. 4 years ago, there was a strategy for violence against women and girls developed at the Combined Authority. Nothing happens as a result of that under the agreements that took place at that summit. So what we had in Liverpool City Council, or what we have, is a domestic abuse strategy, and I've commissioned for a wider strategy against violence against women and girls that takes in some of the issues of which domestic abuse would sit under that strategy, but taking under issues like stalking. Apparently we've got some of the highest rates in the country around stalking, sexual violence and abuse, harmful practices, modern day slavery, so-called honour abuse, pornography, prostitution, consent, and I think there will be a move to include misogyny under violence against women and girls. So what I've asked is a review across the city to look at work we do that is, responds to prevention work, responding to crisis and aftercare. What we've, as I mentioned earlier about some of the services that we have are in response to funding that we receive, and great work has gone into our domestic abuse strategy, but agencies, and I'm talking about everybody who works on this agenda across the city, resources quite rightly go into crisis. And crisis obviously is very important in getting people out of crisis, and some resources go into prevention too. But aftercare is just an important component in stopping repeat victimisation. Personal experience of working the Crown Prosecution Service, some of the cases that I come across, for example, one guy had been prosecuted for slashing his wife, and he'd been prosecuted, he'd done time for it, they were back in relationship. He used to just put Stanley knife on the table when he wanted to control her behaviour. That woman is still at risk in that relationship, and our energy needs to go as much into that to prevent repeat victimisation as it does as getting people out of crisis. So I've got a review to plan to work with all partners to map what we do in the city, not just in the City Council, but in with our other agencies, with a view to developing a strategy for the autumn in identifying how we can use resources more efficiently, work together more effectively, but also that the important prevention during crisis and aftercare is supported in order to stop victims of, ensuring survivors of domestic abuse don't just survive, but actually move on to a new life and are able to thrive again. So that's what we're doing up until autumn. We will expect to launch that. As part of that, the domestic abuse strategy and the existing work that's going on, that Colleen's going to talk about in a minute, is an important component of that violence against women strategy. And as I've mentioned earlier, domestic abuse does cover men as well.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Joanne. Any questions from members? So, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you. This is very good as far as it goes, but last weekend there was an appalling incident, of course, in Plymouth by people who would appear to be connected with something called an incel group, involuntary, I think it was called. Yes, thank you. And this might be following an American growing situation there, in which we need to class certain types of men who collect in a certain way, who believe they have a right to sex, and they may appear to be starting to move into a terrorist field in a way that we've never seen it. So yes, there have been individuals or families, and there's been some nasty people around, but not organised through social media in the way that it appears to be. I know this is very new. It only came to my attention, really. I just thought it was an American thing till last week. But will you, or have you, put it on the agenda for future discussions with the police to see if there are any incel groups or people working in this city? And then in the longer term, the emerging research about this says that the problems start with really young boys thinking they have certain rights against young girls, women, and that they get worse through life. And this is very much an educational process. So by the time you try and stop it when they're 23, 24, it's too late. We needed to stop it when they're 3 or 4, so they're educated about proper relationships with women and the role and rights of women. So are we taking that long-term view and looking at what can be done? I don't want to press teachers to do a lot more. They're overworked at the moment, but if we don't start young, we'll end up picking up the pieces later.
I'm going to let Colleen come back to you about some of the stuff she'll know as an officer about the work that's going on. I think it's an important point around, what has been defined as an incel, when actually it's about women's attitudes towards women in society, and that's why it's really important to have this strategy and address it. You're absolutely right, but some of the terrible patterns within domestic abuse particularly is about what young boys see in family relationships, and that needs addressing, and that's why it's really important to help women in particular out of that cycle, and challenging violence against women. Just the statistics on prosecution and rape alone is just quite horrifying, and there has been talk in the past around uplifting crime for misogyny and calling it out. I'm not sure I'm convinced. Hate crime it's not a crime in its own definition. There's a sentence uplift that's added that gives you extra time on your sentence. I'm not sure stamping out misogyny would work in quite the same way, but I recognise that absolutely we have to do what we can to stamp out misogyny. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the younger we start, the better. But breaking up that pattern within families is really important. And I'll let Colleen come in response to that as well.
Thank you, Mayor. So in terms of the response, what you will have seen, hopefully as councillors, is on the 30th of July, the CitySafe plan was agreed, and domestic abuse and violence against women is a priority within that. And that particularly includes prevention and focus on young people in terms of education, awareness raising. It is important to get to both young men and young women at the earliest possible stage of how to form healthy relationships. And that's been very effectively informed by research that has been taken up by our young advisors about talking to young people about their attitudes towards domestic abuse. We have a number of programs in place, both for prevention and attitudes in that sense, but also to work with younger children and particularly young boys who have had adverse childhood experiences, having experienced domestic abuse in the home. And that is one of the kind of programs that is funded, and it's referenced in the report that you've received as a select committee. And if you want more details, Angela Clark, who's our lead on this work, can give you more details as well. On the specific point around incels and involuntary celibates, it is actually has been recognised within the UK for certainly some months. And it is treated, and we look at it as part of preventing counter-extremism, because it's the action towards extremism and violence. And particularly picking up the very specific point, it's about the motivation to action and violence towards a much wider group in society. So to reassure you and the committee, it's absolutely those kind of what is referred to as unfixed ideologies in some ways, and incel or involuntary celibates, which did start in the US, but the attitudes are absolutely picked up, and we do receive referrals where people are unsure. And certainly for the purposes of the live stream, if any member of the public is encouraged to make a referral if they are concerned about what people are saying, and certainly the motivation to action in those circumstances. But it is absolutely something that we look at as Liverpool under the CitySafe Partnership, and through certainly our prevention and counter-extremism, because it's an extremist ideology, and it's not just limited to what might have been seen as traditional ideologies.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. Initially, if I can just say thank you to Angela for the report. It's really thorough as usual, but more than that, as the person who was the chair of the CitySafe board throughout the pandemic and up until May, thank you for the work that you did to make sure that our frontline agencies got the funding that they needed to keep their heads above water, and more importantly, to protect people in the city that need their support. Your passion and commitment is second to none. So thank you. I think we all agree that it is a fundamental right for people to feel safe, whether it's in their homes, on the streets, in our bars. And we also know that this is a gendered crime, and women bear the brunt. And not only do women bear the brunt of this crime, because it is a crime, but they also bear the brunt of welfare reform. They bear the brunt of, they're often in low-paid, unskilled jobs, they're carers. So this is as a bigger picture is why I'm really, really pleased that as a city council, we put domestic abuse in the city plan and recognise the need to address it. What I have two questions really, and the report talks about the models of prevention, and you've mentioned that as well, Joanne. You've also mentioned on a different topic, but how we often have to respond quickly to government pots of money, and it's a reactive response that we have, and the difficulties that gives us. The report also talks about the increase in children coming into social care. I think it's 1 in 3 now, isn't it, where it's domestic abuse as an issue. And also in here, there is the work that took place on a invest to save model, which obviously would, I think you'll have to correct me on this because it's been a few months, but I think it was in the region of about £1 million that would have given us just the bare minimum we needed to have a really good model that looked at all of the things you mentioned: prevention, crisis intervention and aftercare. So my two questions are, one, because this obviously is running parallel to the beginnings of your budget consultation and conversations around cutting 32 million, because it's cutting 32 million from our council budget. So how do we square that when we have recognised something in the city plan and we know that there is a real need for investment? And let's be honest, the government are not going to give us it, are they? So how do we square that in terms of meeting this need, and what your thoughts are on that? And the second one is around the Violence Reduction Partnership. And obviously there is a debate that Colleen and Angela will tell you I've had for a while about why violence reduction partnerships don't recognise domestic abuse and fund domestic abuse in the way that I feel they should, because we know that knife crime plays a part in many domestic homicides. So it's whether or not you've got any thoughts on what pressure can be put on to actually do something about joining up those things. Thank you.
So there's no extra funds I'm aware of. There's certainly there's no extra funds from us in terms of the pressures that we've got on us. It was more about having the debate and working with partners to see what we can do more efficiently and effectively and how we can work together. But, you know, we know there's no extra resources from it. I think we have to continue to lobby government. I think there's no doubt about that. But I think in terms of some of the agencies and partners we rely on and work with, the fact that they don't get resources from us is very worrying. So we're limited by the funding that we have, but maybe we can look at a conversation about how we work that better. I think the strategy is about bringing everyone to the table to see what we can do better. We have no magic wands. We have no extra pot of money to deliver on that. But in recognising needs, we have to recognise what we do and make sure that we're doing the best we can with the resources we have, which is common to everything that we do at the council. So it wasn't that I was anticipating that the council would be able to find resources to do extra. I think we have to look at the resources we've got across the agencies. There's one thing that Emily Spurrell, in terms of the Police and Crime Commissioner, has talked about, and is that about funding agencies directly rather than local authorities. And if that's going to change, then we need to be all part of the conversation and having that debate. In terms of the Violence Reduction Partnership, I should mention this now. I've been asked to look at on the 25th of September. I won't be here, I'll be at Labour Conference, but we're looking to hold an event around anti-knife crime. There's an organisation in Liverpool called Danny's Place, a woman, Mandy, who lost her son a few years ago to knife crime, and Knife Crime Angels of Chelmsford, I think. I've tried to organise a Remembrance Day for knife victims. That's an event we hope to hold in the city. Again, it comes under my, where I've agreed to take a personal responsibility, not just against violence of women and girls, but also antisocial behaviour, which perhaps this isn't, perhaps this is just directly criminal behaviour. But if you're a young man, you're much more likely to suffer a violent attack by other men in society, and I think we absolutely have to address that. It's different than the conversation around violence against girls. We have got a problem with male violence, and we need to look at that just as equally important. I'll let Colleen come back about the Violence Reduction Partnership, because it's not something I've got too much detail on, but absolutely is an important priority to me. And the horrible homophobic attacks we had recently, but also the genuine fear of people that they're scared to let the kids go out because they're scared, you know, they won't come home. It's absolutely appalling. It has no part in our city, and I value the work that we do around that just as importantly as anything else.
So thank you, Mayor. And in particularly in response to the comment about Violence Reduction Partnership, Councillor Parsons, you're absolutely right. It is specifically referenced in the remit and the use of the funding of violence reduction partnerships that it cannot be directly spent on domestic abuse. However, because there is such a significant commitment to the issues of domestic abuse and our approach in the city around whole family and particularly understanding the impact and the negative impact that it has on children, and the commitment that we've made in the city plan. We have worked very positively with Merseyside Police, who obviously oversee the Violence Reduction Partnership across the county in this instance, to identify areas where where it can be used to support this work particularly. And that's particularly, again, with reference to therapeutic behaviour for young children with adverse childhood experiences, because we know that if those traumatic experiences are not dealt with at an earliest possible stage, they can result in future life chance impacts. So we have seen a higher prevalence of young offenders historically who have had a background of domestic abuse, safeguarding children impacts, etc. So we do work very positively. We continue, and Merseyside Police do this with us, we continue to lobby government, and particularly the Home Office, who obviously issue the guidance of and set the conditions upon what the Violence Reduction Partnership funding can be spent on, about the impact of domestic abuse and needing to look at it more broadly. But I absolutely, support, and I know the Mayor has been committed to this as well, continuing to lobby government through the Domestic Abuse Act as it now is, but also through other channels to lobby for effective funding around domestic abuse more widely. So we are continuing to do that. But again, in terms of the support from the committee, the more voices to this agenda, absolutely. And I think what I would say is obviously the commitment by the Mayor and this council is demonstrated through the city plan, the CitySafe plan, as it's been agreed, and obviously the detail that's in the report here tonight. So we continue to lobby and support members to lobby in that aspect particularly.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I mean, I'm pleased that children are properly embedded in the report now, and it has been last couple of years, and I think that's really important. I think the work, particularly around adverse childhood experiences, which does involve schools, Councillor Kemp, and as well as other youth services, I think is essential in terms of understanding the impact that domestic abuse is having on children, boys and girls, and how they and their own development, and what happens to them to now, but also what happens to them later in life. But one of the things I just thought you might want to consider, Mayor, is in terms of a housing strategy. I think, and we get lots of case work with victims of domestic abuse, domestic violence, who have had to leave their home and haven't got anywhere adequate to go. And hostel accommodation and the accommodation that we have, I would say, is inadequate. And I think one of the things that I wanted to do when I was had responsibility for housing was to use the development, what we can do as a council in developing and building houses, to respond to the needs that we have within our community that have got a direct impact in the services that we provide. And I would ask you to have a look at how we can develop, how are using our borrowing powers that we have to develop housing, to provide accommodation for victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence without them having to go into temporary accommodation all the time that lasts a lot longer than it should do, which is a long way from where the children are going to school and they can't afford it. And I think that is part of the drive in terms of what we do in terms of the provision of council housing in the city.
I think you're right, Barry, and I think looked after children is another area I'd like to look at with that. I think in terms of provision outside of the city and what we can do around what we can do in future in terms of building money to build housing, but also accommodation for people who are vulnerable and in need.
Any more questions? Okay, is the report noted? Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 6, which is the work programme for 2021-22. Have any members of the committee suggestions for any items which they would like to be included in the coming year? If you could just show your hands. Councillor Radford.
If I sort of just spend a week door knocking through the areas, and I know we all have the council issues as councillors are interested, but the base level I'm getting on the doorsteps are basically two things, and that is getting a lot of pressure for the communal bin system to be rolled out. I've had a lot of dialogue with our cleansing team, and we're wondering is what we can do. We've offered to contribute neighbourhood funds to speed up the programme. We did it during the allocating programme. We've offered our own time and community facilities to expedite the consultations. I think we really would benefit. It would give us a cost saving plus an improved service if we could focus on how we could speed up the rollout of the communal bin system, because it has clear benefits for communities. But it also, I think, if done right, could actually give us some of the cost savings we need to do as authority. So that's one thing. I know we've had another feedback about a lot of progress on the housing issue, and I totally agree with Councillor Kushner's comments. In many working class districts of the city, in the older parts of the districts, we still have a high proportion of long-term vacants. About 3 or 4% of our housing stock is long-term vacants in the terrace communities. And that's often a dilapidated house or a house where there's been stuck in probate or there's an ownership issue. And I just really think we need to look at how we could mop up, because the one derelict house in the street is the rat run. The criminals get to go and raid all the other houses. It's the property that causes damage to the 2 neighbouring houses. It's the arson property that sets a whole row of houses alight. And the impact is so detrimental out of all proportion. So I'm wondering if we could have a look, and I know we have discussed it, the previous mayor and the previous mayor before that, so to speak. We're all talking, leader of the council, was about whether we could get some sort of collective ballpark CPO system or some sort of government initiative. I know there was under the last government, it was still a Conservative government, the last government did offer £1 million grant towards derelict housing initiatives, and it didn't bring in the traction we wanted because we didn't give the housing associations the league up pressures to CPO derelict land and sites. So I think there's a real multiple benefit that will give us avenues of support for the other activities that Councillor Kushner has mentioned.
Okay. The future agenda, wasn't it? Wasn't a question, it was for the future agenda.
Okay, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Chair. There are, first of all, one suggestion and then a suggested approach, which is slightly different than a specific suggestion. I think that I was reassured that we're going to get the KPIs suggested to the next meeting, but they're going to need testing, they're going to need working out, and I think it would be of value to the council if one of our work streams was to assess whether they're the right ones, whether we're collecting the information correctly, whether there's more information that we need or that we can get hold of. So it would be a work stream where 2 or 3 people could assist the process, not detract from it, but assist the process by spending more time than perhaps the Mayor and her Cabinet colleagues have got available to look at these. The second one is to say, really, to the Mayor, the Chief Executive and senior officers, what is it that you think you could do with some help with? Because I think the most effective scrutiny is where there's a relationship between the Cabinet member or Mayor and the scrutineers, so that we're going to scrutinise something which they say, yeah, we're really quite interested in that. can you give us a hand with this, rather than us choosing 2 or 3 ideas at random, which then go to the cabinet and say, probably okay that, but we can't do anything about it. So I'd like to engage, perhaps, when we look at the city plan, which I understand we will be doing fairly soon, and this wouldn't be a sign of weakness, but the mayor and the chief executive saying, we want more help with these areas. Would you look at this and this? And then we can do something practical that will help the process, which is far more rewarding than us setting up task groups just to pick holes in someone else's work.
Joanne, did you want to?
Yeah, I think you're right, Richard. I know that Lisa really welcomes, Lisa, who's looking after the KPIs and policy, Lisa Smith, really welcomed the idea of, a couple of members helping her shape the KPIs, the final reporting structure, because whilst it might make loads of sense to officers, members might have a different view. So I know that Lisa really welcomed that. In terms of scrutiny in the city plan, I think absolutely, I think that should, I'll have a think and I'll speak to Tony as well. The city plan was agreed with partners across the city. We'll do a council plan, for our own internal work that we have to do, but there will be weaknesses across that, and I think you're absolutely right. We should scrutinise those areas that are weak so we can improve on them. That's really helpful.
Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Chair. I think the budget, I know it's discussed in other places, but I think the budget is an item that should be discussed here regularly as an update, particularly given the issues that we have. And then the other thing, which Councillor Kemp has drawn my attention to, the Chief Executive is not here. Usually, the most senior officer that supports the cabinet member, or the mayor in that case, usually does attend select committees. I don't know whether there's a reason why the Chief Executive doesn't attend these meetings, but I would have expected him to. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think we'll be having lots of conversations around the budget in terms of engagement, where we normally talked about the budget January or February. We've started in August within our own group. We're having city conversations around the budget. We have a finance and resources committee. So I think there'll be lots of opportunity to discuss the budget. In terms of Tony and Chief Executive, I can, if you want to see the Chief Executive, the Mayoral and Performance Select Committee, I can request that.
Thank you. Councillor Toolan.
Is there a time that we've got to get back with ideas, or do you need them this evening?
Let's say,
just to assist committee members, it would be sensible if I circulate to members of the committee a duplicate copy of the terms of reference, and if I could ask members to email me directly, and if I could say the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'll give you a definitive deadline in the email. The reason why I ask a reasonable timescale is so that officers can then go ahead and prepare the relevant reports for our next meeting as well, and give those time to be approved and prepared in due course, and then be published with the 5 working days notices required. So if everyone emails back to me any suggestions, I will collate those and I'll circulate to all members of the committee once I've got a definitive list by that deadline.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Chris.
Just to mention, one of the important things that Michael's just mentioned there is the terms of reference of the committee and the responsibilities the mayor's got, which was discussed at the first meeting. Big issues about getting the KPI and the performance framework together, because that goes right across the piece. In terms of the meetings we've now got 11 committees, as well as the select committees, we've got others. So I just want to be clear, because we have a chair session at the end of every cycle, but where we might have a bit of duplication or overlap. Otherwise, the issue will be you've got officers going to similar meetings saying the same thing. So that's why we just try and keep to the terms of reference of the committee. And for this one, the key one was around the performance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're finished for the evening. I'd like to thank members and officers for all your help, the way you conducted the meeting. Thank you.